Elise wasn't a stranger to solitude. In fact, she welcomed it. As a photographer, she found beauty in the quiet corners of the city, capturing the stillness of forgotten alleys and empty parks. Her work was celebrated for its haunting quality, each photo a moment suspended in time, an intimate glimpse into a world most people overlooked. But recently something had changed. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly, like a whisper in the dark. Reviewing her shots one evening, Elise noticed something odd in one of the frames, a figure, blurry and indistinct, lingering in the background of an otherwise empty street. At first, she dismissed it. Just a passerby, she thought, nothing unusual in a city of millions. Yet the figure nagged at her. As she scrolled through more of her recent work, she found them again and again. A shadow in the window, a silhouette in an alleyway, almost distant, always out of focus. Elise's heart began to race as she zoomed in on each image. The figure just wasn't a passerby. They were watching her. Over the next few days, the presence became more frequent, more deliberate. No matter where she went, whether she was shooting in a crowded market or a deserted rooftop, the figure was there. Sometimes alone, sometimes with others, but always with the same unsettling posture, as if they were waiting for something or someone. Elise's mind spun with questions. Who were these people? Why were they in her photographs? Had she unknowingly captured something she shouldn't have? Paranoia began to gnaw at her, each photograph becoming a puzzle she couldn't solve. And then, one day, the realization struck her like a bolt of lightning. These weren't strangers at all. In one of the latest images taken outside an old theater, she recognized the face, barely visible, but unmistakable. It was Sophie, her best friend from childhood. But that couldn't be. Sophie had died years ago in a tragic accident. As Elise's hands trembled, she pulled up another photo. This time the figure was more clear, more recognizable. It was Mark, another friend lost in the same accident. His face was twisted into a grotesque sneer, his eyes hollow and accusing. Elise's world began to collapse. How could this be happening? The accident. She had buried those memories deep, trying to move on, trying to forget the pain, the guilt. But now, it seemed her past had clawed its way back from the grave, manifesting in the images that had once brought her solace. Desperate for answers, Elise scoured through old photo albums, searching for a pattern, a clue, anything that might explain the figures. What she found sent a chill down her spine. The figures had always been there, lurking in the background of her life. In photos from her childhood, they were shadowy shapes standing just out of focus, their presence overlooked in the joy of birthday parties and family gatherings. The more Elise looked, the clearer they became, until there was no denying it. They had been with her all along, and she had never noticed. But why now? Why were they revealing themselves so clearly, so aggressively? As the days passed, Elise's paranoia grew. The figures were no longer confined to her photographs. She saw them in reflections, caught glimpses of them on TV screens, and even heard their whispers in the dead of the night. Her once comforting solitude had turned into a prison of fear. One night, Elise received an envelope in the mail. No return address, no postmark, just her name scrawled in a familiar hand. Inside was a single photograph, different from the ones she had taken. It was a picture of her, standing in her living room, staring blankly at the camera. But she wasn't alone. The figures were there too, standing right beside her, their faces clear, their eyes fixed on her, with a mixture of anger and sorrow. Elise's breath caught in her throat. She didn't remember taking this photo. She didn't even remember being in that room at that time. Panic surged through her as she looked closer, realizing with horror that the figure's hands were reaching out, almost touching her. And their faces, they were no longer distorted or unclear. They were her friends, the ones she had lost, the ones she had failed to save. In that moment, the truth hit her with the force of a sledgehammer. She wasn't the one being haunted. She was the ghost. All these years, she had been the stranger in the photographs, an echo of a life that had ended long ago. The accident hadn't just taken her friends, it had taken her too. But she hadn't moved on. She had lingered, trapped in a world that wasn't hers anymore, capturing moments that she could never be part of. As she stared at the photograph, Elise felt a cold presence behind her. Slowly she turned to face the mirror on the wall. There in the reflection stood one of the figures, Sophie, her face twisted into a sad smile. Elise's breath hitched as their eyes met, and in that instant she knew this was the end, or perhaps it was just the beginning. The lights flickered and the room grew colder. Elise's reflection began to fade, Sophie's image growing clearer until it was the only thing she could say. Then everything went dark. When the lights came back on, the room was empty. The camera, still perched on the tripod, captured nothing but silence. The figures in the photographs were gone, their presence nothing more than a shadow in Elise's memory, a memory that would soon be forgotten, just like the girl who had taken them. And somewhere, in a city that never sleeps, another photographer picked up their camera, unaware of the shadowy figures that might be lurking just out of focus, waiting for their moment to step into the light.